Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a landmark case that asks a really fascinating question. What happens when someone in a divorce takes the settlement money, but then decides to back out of the whole deal? It's a wild story about a broken promise that went all the way to India's highest court.
So yeah, that's the central puzzle right there. In the case of Anil and Maya Jain, this one question traveled all the way up to the Supreme Court. It's really a question of fairness, you know? Once a deal is made and one person has already cashed in, can the other person just change their mind and bring the whole thing to a grinding halt?
All right, so let's start at the very beginning. Let's look at how what seemed like a perfectly reasonable agreement to end a marriage just completely fell apart.
So Anil and Maya Jain were married for nearly 20 years. And after all that time, they decided they just couldn't make it work anymore. So in 2004, it looked like they were heading for a pretty amicable split. They filed a joint petition for divorce. But just a year later, that mutual agreement was completely shattered.
And here is the absolute core of the deal. This wasn't just a simple promise. It was a real transaction. Anil transferred valuable property rights over to Maya, and she accepted them. This whole financial settlement was basically the foundation of their entire agreement to go their separate ways.
So after the 6-month legal waiting period, you'd think things would be straightforward. Anil had held up his end of the bargain, he was ready to move on, but Maya's position, well, it was kind of baffling. She wanted to keep the property, and she still wanted to live separately from him, but, and this is the kicker, she would not agree to the divorce anymore. This basically created a perfect legal trap, leaving Anil completely stuck with no way forward.
So what do you even do in a situation like that? Well, Anil turned to the courts, right? He was probably hoping for a simple, common-sense resolution. But instead, what he found was just a frustrating legal brick wall. The rules, as they were written, just had no answer for this problem.
First, he went to the district court, and they came back with the same answer. Then he went to the high court. Same story. Both courts said they were bound by the strict letter of the law, and for a mutual consent divorce, the rule is crystal clear. Both people have to keep saying yes right up until the final moment. Since Maya had backed out, their hands were tied. Legally, they were just powerless to grant the divorce.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the High Court itself admitted it couldn't solve the problem. They basically threw up their hands and pointed to the one place a solution might exist. They essentially said, look, we can't help you, but there is one court in this country that has a special power to deliver complete justice, a power that goes beyond the rigid text of the law.
And so, the case finally lands at the nation's highest court. And it turns out, the Supreme Court had two special keys that could potentially unlock this whole crazy legal puzzle.
The first key was really about the court being willing to just look at the reality of the situation. It's this idea of an irretrievable breakdown. It's not just about legal papers and consent. It's about a court acknowledging when a marriage is, for all intents and purposes, completely over. There is just no hope of fixing it.
And then we have the second, and honestly the most critical key, Article 142. You can think of this as the Supreme Court's ultimate tool for fairness, its legal superpower. It's a unique power in the Constitution that lets the court step in and basically craft a just outcome, especially when the existing laws are actually creating an injustice.
So armed with these tools, the ability to see the marriage for what it was, which was irretrievably broken, and the power to make sure the result was fair, the Supreme Court took a really hard look at all the facts of the case.
The court really weighed everything. I mean, first, they'd been living apart for more than 7 years. That's a long time. Second, Maya had already taken and was benefiting from the financial settlement. And then there's her completely contradictory position. She wanted to live apart, which is one of the reasons for a mutual divorce, while at the same time blocking that very divorce. The court just found her withdrawal of consent completely unacceptable in this situation. So here it is, the crucial verdict. The Supreme Court decided that forcing this couple to stay legally married served absolutely no purpose. It was just a legal fiction at that point. The real injustice, in the court's eyes, would have been to let the situation drag on. So using its unique power under Article 142, it did what the lower courts couldn't. It granted the divorce.
Now, this decision was so much bigger than just sorting things out for Anil and Maya. It actually carved out a really powerful and lasting precedent for family law in India.
The legacy of this case is huge. It basically sends a strong message that you can't manipulate the legal process. You can't take all the benefits of a divorce deal and then just refuse to follow through on your end. It reinforces that the Supreme Court can and will step in to end a marriage that is factually over, protecting that incredible idea of complete justice that Article 142 promises.
So the case of Anil and Maya Jain leaves us with this huge question about what justice really is. Is it about sticking to the strict letter of the law, no matter how unfair the outcome is? Or is it about having the wisdom and the power to make sure the result is, above everything else, fair?